Welcome to Ronald's Corner of the Cloud again, and hello, I'm glad you're joining us. Today's focus is the CIO in the evolving cloud and the applications that they have to run. Prior to this, we saw Bill Kleiman, MTM Technologies, Vice President of Strategy, and he told us how he's moving his clients to the cloud, the concerns, and how to mitigate them. Pat Kirpin, last week, was here with us from Cohesive Networks. Pat was the designer of Cohesive Networks, which is an infrastructure as a service. He provides pay-as-you-go security for folks in the cloud. So today we have Joe Brennan. Joe is the CIO and General Counsel of LLC and General Counsel for Clarity Consulting. And he has a unique role. Joe has been a CIO prior to cloud development, and now he's fully invested in the cloud. And we wanted to get Joe's take on these evolving technologies. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. So, point of clarification, I'm not the CIO at LLC. I'm a founder, general counsel. I work as CEO there sometimes, a little bit, whatever we need. So thank you so much for having me. This is a great chance to talk about stuff that I find to be the most fascinating stuff going on in America today. Frankly, I'm fascinated to be doing what I'm doing right now, and I'm fascinated and glad to be doing it in Chicago because I think Chicago is incredibly well positioned right now to just be an absolute force in both the economy that's happening today and the economy that's coming in the future. And you and I have talked a lot about some of the companies that we think are, fast-moving, incredibly cool companies, whether it be security, whether it be, data mining, whether it be just pure configuring AWS and other kinds of services for customers and migrating apps. There's so much going on in Chicago. It's like a candy store.
You know, Joe, when we first met over at LLC, I knew that you were a CIO of the Field Museum. You were also General Counsel. This unique situation. Tell me a little bit about that role, playing both those roles in an organization. Maybe we'll expand a little bit more, but what's it like running the shop and being the lawyer?
So I don't know that I've never been able to find anybody else who's had the dual title of CIO and General Counsel. And how it happened at the Field Museum was a little bit by chance. I knew a lot about technology. Obviously, I'd always worked in technology before I went to the Field Museum, and we had a big challenge that we had to solve, and I'd been very vocal about my opinions about it, and so I was asked to try and help solve some of those problems. So I took on the dual role of General Counsel and CIO, and obviously there is a little element of the hen and the fox guarding the hen house. And so that was something that I had to manage internally, but what was surprising to me was how difficult it actually was to move from a situation in which you are looking at challenges and talking about what solutions should be and actually trying to make them happen in the world. So I will say that it was a great challenge. We had a lot of success, and I'm a much better lawyer for having worked as the CIO.
So you had challenges there, and we talked about that because by definition, a nonprofit organization like the Field Museum is a challenge. Economics for sure.
Yeah.
And you had some big donors, but what would the cloud have done for you? We've talked about what would the cloud have done for you that you couldn't do because of constraints of staff, economics, and so forth? What would it have looked like if the cloud applications were available then?
Yeah, so this is, the cloud was already there, but it wasn't as mature as it is today. We began our strategic push in late 2010, early 2011. And we went through all the systems and all the challenges we had at the Field Museum, and what we realized was what I call the concatenated bottlenecks problem. Literally, everything was interrelated and everything was broken, and we had so many things to fix at the same time we didn't know how to do it. No idea where to begin. What we did was put together a program that was thoughtful. We reached out to the Granger Foundation, who gave us a large and very, very, very thoughtful and generous grant. And with that support, we began to replace systems one by one. We rebuilt teams, we reorganized the operations, and we started to systematically replace systems, whether it be the wired network throughout the building, or adding a wireless network for the first time, or rebuilding enterprise applications. We migrated, in the course of that, even in 2010, the cloud was there, but we didn't have the level of confidence, both for our trustee committee or ourselves internally, that we would have had today. So what I can say is, having done that analysis in late 2010 and implemented over the course of a couple of years, if I were doing it today, knowing what I know today, having learned what I've learned over the last year and a half, I would do things radically differently. And you would see a much bolder and more aggressive push to move things into the cloud, to take advantage of the efficiencies, to take advantage of the services, the robustness of the services you can get now. I'm an evangelist and wish I could go back and talk to myself.
So what I'm hearing you say, and what I hear a lot of people say, is you can make mistakes. Actually, the cost of making mistakes. But today, with the cloud, you can test, develop, we'll talk about that, and it's not as egregious, especially in an organization like Field Museum, where limited cash and people breathing down your throat. You can, with the ability to develop and operate the application off of the main grid, it's a much different world.
Yeah, so even in late 2010, our perception was that a really, really large data set was a giant hindrance. It was a burden, it was a challenge. It was the thing around which everything else was going to have to pivot. And whether it was our 100,000 page website or whether it was the, we wanted to digitize in high resolution more than 24 million specimens, that database was just extravagantly gigantic. And today, my perception of that challenge is very different.
Which gets us to LLC. Tell us a little about it. AWS shop, big scale. Tell me, how did it start? How did you get involved, and where's it going, and what's it doing for the clients that it has?
LLC is a small startup. It's actually been in existence for a little more than a year and a half now. It started by two of the principal technologists who met each other in the course of the Obama campaign. So they were part of the core technology team. There are a lot of, as you well know, there are a lot of companies in Chicago that have their legacy back on some level to that group of remarkable technologists who did that. They like to say they elected a president, which may well be true. What we do at LLC is a very specialized subset, ultimately, of even just AWS. Amazon Web Services, massively scalable infrastructure as a service model with all the services that are pertinent to it. Our specialty is really one of two things. We either go to an application that is a large, complicated, mission-critical application with large data needs and large scalability needs, and we re-engineer it and migrate it into the cloud and support it, or we build an application from scratch with much the same focus. So we, if, for example, you wanted to be able to stream video and you wanted to be able to distribute that video in live real time in high definition throughout the US, and you needed to architect the infrastructure behind it, that is the kind of thing that we really focus and specialize in.
And what I like what you said is mission critical. So it's not like, let's move our email, let's move Outlook to the cloud. This is, let's move our business to the cloud.
Yep.
And the benefits to that from premise base, what does that afford you?
Clients migrate to the cloud for a variety of reasons, but the primary reason that they migrate to the cloud is the need to fix a problem. So we're constantly called because they have a situation where they realize that they're going to have something that they need to do that they're not going to be able to do. So what the cloud allows you to do is simultaneously solve a problem, inevitably, by getting an application rebuilt and migrated out to the cloud. At the same time, that allows you to save a lot of money. As compared to, we have this argument constantly with people, right? Do you actually save money by migrating into the cloud? And is AWS the cheapest version? I don't know if it's the cheapest. It all depends on what you're actually doing. It doesn't really matter, because still, from my perspective, and I'd be happy to share my spreadsheets with people, you're saving money. And you have the added advantage of aligning your operations, your systems. The cost of running your systems scales with the utilization. So you have a neat sort of the new Occam's razor. Your costs should scale, and if you have a bunch of costs that aren't scaling at all, maybe you want to scratch your head and take another look at those. What
you're doing, actually. Which brings me to a good point that you made. Our audience is usually entrepreneurs. Businesses, some that are fledgling businesses. from your role as CIO, from a founder, from a lawyer in compliance issues, what's your advice? Using the cloud, what should people be looking at? And your advice for fledgling entrepreneurs looking at the cloud?
So, yeah, two things. We see clients, whether or not we actually do the work for them or not, but we see clients and potential clients all over the place. It isn't enterprise clients only come around and talking to us, and it isn't just very, very small startups. The agility that the cloud can offer you and the ability to get your infrastructure cost to scale is facilitative in a way that traditional models of financing your thing just aren't. For example, I know of a group of guys who are getting together, and they have an idea about streaming music. They have an enterprise, they're building it. They're going to be doing that, I think, on top of AWS. They might build another cloud provider, but either way, what's going to happen is they don't have enough money to do it in the traditional way because of the amount of data that they're going to have to serve up all over the country. And what they are going to be able to do, though, I think, is create a really, really good interface. They're going to get a lot of great content, and they're going to have a model which should bring them to market in a very effective way. That couldn't have happened before. That's incredibly cool. I can't wait to see it. In terms of what companies really, really get out of things, and what the core advantage really is of the cloud, I come back to this. The efficiency not only of, building software today, it's so fascinating to me. Building software today is, I think, fundamentally different now, increasingly so, than it was many years ago, where you sort of build something and then you defend the hell out of it. Right? So that was my job as CIO. You build an application and you guard it so that nobody will make any changes. And if you make changes, it's really scheduled. The building of an API with a lot of microprocesses built into it, this whole DevOps mindset where you actually iterate rapidly and you develop new capabilities just within the core of the API. I think that this is just a fascinating thing. It builds agility into everybody's business model. And increasingly what we see is when clients come to us these days, that's what they're talking about.
So from an entrepreneurial perspective, you don't have to concern yourself when you watch the Sunday magazines and think, if I'm not sequencing genomes or curing cancer, there's a place for the cloud that can develop my business with agility, with speed, possibly with cost savings, but certainly, like you said, with the ability to make changes rapidly to adapt to the changes of the business. And what I tell people all the time, yes, and I forgot one thing that I think is incredibly important. So yes is the answer. I believe that that's there. The other thing that you get is the robustness. You get, if you work with AWS and if you don't know it yourself, you find somebody to help you a little bit, but you can get a huge amount of information, thoughtful information about how your service is actually running, where your costs are really being generated. You can easily plug in other services and sort of, mine your own activity for metrics about what's working and what's not working. All of those things are much harder if you're doing it on your own hardware somewhere. Okay. So we've talked about this. I'm not going to go 15 years because predictions for 15 years, God only knows. And
that's 4 product cycles.
And 5 years from now, I'd like to know what you think in the next 1 to 5 years. But what I will say is probably, like we've talked about, someone will look at this archive somewhere 2 years from now and they're, oh my God, what were they worrying about? It was just basic. We do that drop and drag. But what do you see is evolving over the next few years in the cloud as it relates to entrepreneurial endeavors, enterprise applications?
I think we're still at the very beginning of the migration to cloud, and everybody says this, so I'm not particularly, I think we're 10 or 15% of the way in 5 years, I think that you're going to see not only a huge amount more adoption, you'll see costs vastly lower than they are today, to a degree that it really will be difficult to come up with an argument unless you're a financial institution or the federal government and you have certain compliance.
Who's in the cloud, by the way?
Yeah, yeah, GovCloud, right. You're going to have a hard time coming up with a cost-based argument. What people really, really need to think about when they develop applications today is building from the get-go for compliance, building from the get-go for security, building from the get-go for privacy concerns. This is the advice that we give to people. Like, think of when you take an application apart right now, step back. Think intelligently about how generally you're going to want this thing to work over the course of the next 10 years. And so 5 years from now, my hope is that many, many companies will have done that. And overall, the security and the efficiency and the quality of what we see out there is just going to be there. And my secret hope is that nobody ever remembers where we are today, and they all think it was this easy from the get-go.
Exactly, and that was my point, that they'll look at this a year or two from now and say, what were they talking about? That's
well,
just every day.
It wasn't that hard.
It wasn't, exactly. So, well, thank you. I appreciate your insights, the ability to let us know what it's truly like for someone who's actually living day by day, developing cloud products, living in the applications, and had to deal with that prior to this. I'm looking for big things from your organization, LLC, and yourself. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. And Joe Brennan, LLC, will have the website. I can find you on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We'll have that on our site for you to go to. Again, thank you for all your time.
My pleasure.
Look forward to talking again.
Good.